When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Reese Comics YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be looking at George R.R. Martin's latest not-a-blog and talking about kind of the ending of the show and the books, as well as some other things he talked about in here about how different the books are going to be and some of his progress and all of that. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps channel grow, reach, or people that might like this content as well. Hopefully we're going to be covering House of the Dragon. Not hopefully, we will be covering House of the Dragon. And also maybe Rings of Power, so if you're interested in those two, we will be covering those when those come out. But getting into this article, or this, I guess, blog, the main reason I didn't cover this initially is because, for the most part, there's not a lot of new information in here, in my opinion. I think what a lot of people are excited about is that George R.R. Martin talks very highly, in my opinion, of Winds of Winter and his writing process, and even is a little bit more positive, whereas a lot of other posts we've seen from George R.R. Martin, he seemed very frustrated, seemed kind of bitter towards the fans, and in this kind of post, he is very much more, it seems positive, and it seems like there's this light at the end of the road that maybe Winds of Winter possibly could be done maybe next year, end of the year, around like Christmas time, or maybe 2024, which I think is a bit more realistic. He doesn't specifically say that in this article, but that's kind of how I look at it. But start out this blog, he kind of is talking about how he's kind of a gardener where he is prone to changing a lot of things. And that's why when people talk to me about kind of the sample chapters, I take them with kind of a grain of salt because they're very prone to being changed. But I do think that they have been pretty good ones we have gotten from George. George, he does even talk about why he stopped doing those, because if he kept doing it the way he was, he probably would have gotten like half of the book already read to us before we even got it. So I'm kind of happy he did stop that. But yeah, that's kind of his. As we get further down in this, he kind of talks about House of the Dragon a little bit, and he starts kind of talking about A Song of Ice and Fire and how there's so many details going on, so much stuff's going on that it's kind of hard to kind of put all those together, and where he got where he got inspiration from things. So he talks about in here like the Red Wedding, the Wall. Then he just talks about other things he just kind of, talks about, or that it just are random. And that kind of leads into Winds of Winter. This is not something he talks about a lot. As you guys know, in a lot of his posts, his Winds of Winter updates are very brief. Usually saying I'm working on it, and that's about it. But in this one, he does start out with saying, he's working on it, but he goes into a lot more detail, right? He says he gets done with the Tyrion chapter, which is good. And all that stuff. But I think the most important thing that I think I had already expected is that in here he says that the show and the book, their endings are going to be quite different. Now, this is, again, the big reason why I didn't make a video on this right away, and that's why I kind of asked for your guys' opinions and thoughts if you guys want to see my reaction. But George goes on to say that the show and the book's ending is going to be very different, and we're going to have to kind of choose which one we like better. And I thought this was pretty obvious, just based upon the fact there's so many major players that are still alive in the books and that are going to play a bigger role. And if we even look at characters, right, the show did actually do, they're very different. So he goes on to mention Euron, and also Asha in this. There's other characters that I'm going to specifically talk about in here in a second, but if you look at the way the book and the show is structured, if they had done 10 seasons with the show, I think it would have been a lot closer to what the books would have ended up being. But because the show and the showrunners were so kind of hasty to end Game of Thrones, that I think they ended up destroying a lot of plot lines. They ended up going through things way too quickly, and is why the book series is going to be a lot different, in my opinion. And he goes on to name a couple characters. Now, again, this is something I want to talk about, because there's certain characters in here that it's interesting that he specifically names them, right? So Lady Stoneheart, Young Griff, the Tattered Prince, Penny, Brown, Ben Plum, and the Shave Pate are all characters like, yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot of characters in Marine. Most of the characters he even lists here are characters in Essos. But some of the more interesting ones here is Jane Westerling, for one, because he says that these characters are important to the plot. Now, Jane Westerling is a character that I thought was really just going to be in the prologue, and that's kind of where we would see the end of her. But the fact that George R.R. Martin specifically names both Darkstar and Jane Westerling is quite interesting to me because I think Dark Star, to me, I've speculated he's going to have a major role in kind of the Martell plot and being maybe the person that uncovers to the crown kind of what happened maybe with Marcella and kind of being that catalyst to both Ariane and Duran. And then Jane, I'm still interested to see where George is going to go with Jane because I didn't think she was actually going to be that important to the plot. I thought she was going to be a character that we know of, that was going to be somebody that was important in the prologue, and then that was it. But maybe with this post, she's going to be given more of a role in the next few books. Also, Quaithe is mentioned to still have a part to play, which I think is very interesting because I did a video this week talking about Daenerys. And Daenerys, to me, it's very interesting to speculate how she is going to come to the conclusion that Aegon, if he is a Blackfire, how he is a Blackfire. Like, how is there going to be like sufficient evidence for Daenerys to come to that conclusion? You guys have kind of gone back and forth with me in the comments about is Dany going to initially want Aegon to be a Targaryen? Because I personally am someone that I think Daenerys is someone that has really no family left. I think she would want to believe that Aegon actually is her relative. Um, but a lot of you guys have said the opposite, where the show route, how we saw it with Jon, where she would be like, she would see it kind of more as a threat to her, like, I guess, role, which, again, it would be. But I don't know. I think that's going to be interesting. But him specifically saying Quaithe has a part to play makes me think that Quaithe could be involved with kind of helping Daenerys come to the conclusion and revealing maybe specifically that Aegon is a Blackfire. Now, he also mentions Rickon Stark, and I think this is interesting because when I had first started making this channel, I had very much downsized the role of Rickon Stark, so George here is reinforcing that Rickon will have a part to play, which I think is interesting, and I have definitely switched my opinions on Rickon. I think he definitely will be a character that maybe is the person that the North kind of rallies behind, but is not the person in charge, whether that be a council, whether that be Jon ruling for now, or maybe even Sansa way later on at the end of the books. Who knows? And he kind of mentions that that is kind of why Winds is taking so long, because you have so many characters, like, you know, we talk about in this paragraph, and that he says this is hard, guys, which I don't think anybody is saying this is easy. I think the reason a lot of people like to kind of criticize George is because George is someone that seems very distracted. A lot of the times he seems very frustrated with the fans because they are, you know, voicing those opinions, which they're allowed to do, but sometimes I think they're too critical and too difficult and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, again, I think Winds of Winter is a very difficult book. I think it's easily the most difficult book George is gonna have to write because, like I've made the comparison in the past, if we look at kind of the first three books, I think George had those books very much planned out, and I think of all of the books to write, this is going to be the hardest one because not only do you, it's kind of the middle book, right? It's not the book where you're leading things, because A Dance with Dragons and Feast for Crows are very much books where we're having our characters, mainly like Stark characters, growing into the people they need to be by the end of the series. Now, this next book is kind of your transition book. It's not really your major payoff book, but it has to have some payoffs in it to make it interesting and all that. So it's kind of your transition book where you need all of these characters to get from this point to that point, and that's why I think it's taking so long with the amount of characters he has. And that's kind of what he's trying to say, I believe, in this paragraph. Now, he says there will be new characters, which, again, that makes sense. A Song of Ice and Fire is a really big place, but no new viewpoints is key here, because I think he just doesn't have room for it at this point. So I like that he said that and all that. And as we get closer to the end here, he is saying, and he does confirm, that the endings are going to be very different, right? In this, he's kind of saying that characters that survived in Game of Thrones will maybe not survive in A Song of Ice and Fire, and vice versa. And that's something that I think is pretty obvious, right? I think if you are someone that pays close attention to the books and the TV show and how George R.R. Martin has reacted to the show's ending, I think most people knew this already. But so then he continues on talking about kind of the books and how we're going to have to choose which version is kind of better. And the thing that I think is very much I agree with George on here is this last part. So let's read this last part. I do fear that a certain proportion of fans are so angry about how long Winds has taken me that they are prepared to hate the book unread. That saddens me, but there's nothing I can do about it but write the best book that I can, and I hope that when it comes out, most fans will read it with clean hands and an open mind. Now, I think George is right here, because now I don't think there are as many fans that are going to go into the book hating it already. I think there's going to be a lot of fans that, because the book took so long to write, they're going to it has to be in their minds like the perfect book. Like, it has to be like, for most people, Storm of Swords is the best book in the out of the series. So I think a lot of people are going to be holding it up to that high of a standard because of how long it took to write. And that's something that I think is not great for the book, because I don't think this book is supposed to be that. This book is supposed to be kind of continuing on the development of our characters and kind of getting them to the end of their training and getting them to the places they need to be for the big payoffs in Dream of Spring. Because Dream of Spring, in my opinion, would be the book that would be the most comparable to Storm of Swords, where you're going to have a lot of your payoffs, your conclusions to a lot of arcs, and if George is ever going to do like a series after Game or a Song of Ice and Fire, it would be the one that could kind of set up where those characters go. So for me, I think it is unfortunate, because of how long George R.R. Martin's taken, that a lot of fans are going to have that kind of reaction to it. And what I think is key here, though, is that at the end of this, even with him saying that, because it is really realistic, he's being pretty positive, saying, he will write the best book that he can. And I think that's really positive. And he says he's going to get back to Tyrion and all that. But I think why most people wanted me to react to it, or to a lot of YouTubers are making this kind of video, and I didn't want to oversaturate the market, because in my opinion, I don't think this video necessarily needed to be made. I don't think there was a lot of information in here, to me, that was like groundbreaking or we didn't already know, right? Because the main points of this is George talking about his writing style, talking about how the show and book are going to be different towards the end, and kind of what he's been working on within A Song of Ice and Fire as a whole, and the positivity he has towards it. There wasn't a lot in here that, to me, was new, right? Like, a lot of the things I just talked about, to me, I already expected. Maybe you guys didn't. Maybe you thought they were going to be a lot closer to the show. And I think there are going to be elements of the show that will be in the book ending. I think George was someone that wanted to do the Mad Queen Dany thing. I think he originally wanted to do that, and I think seeing how badly the show did it, maybe he doesn't want to do that now. I think that's something he could definitely be thinking twice about, because I'm someone that really liked that idea as well, and I think the show just butchered it for me to where I don't even want to see it now at this point. And I think it's something George kind of has to wrestle with, because you got kind of a prelude of what fan reaction would be if he did that in the books. But I think things like Bran becoming king, which is something everyone kind of hated, is something that you can do a lot better in the books, right? If we have so much more going on with Bloodraven at the moment, that I think Bran becoming king is actually a very fitting ending for George, with how he could go with all of the kind of the Children of the Forest kind of taking over, and that kind of being your ending. I think George maybe is second guessing that ending now, when in reality, I think he should just kind of go for it, if that's what he wanted to do initially. There's other plot points that he kind of confirmed were going to be in the books that were in the show, and maybe he might be rethinking those. Things like Shireen being burned is something that or sacrificed is something that George has kind of promised and said is confirmed in the books, but maybe he doesn't want to do that now. There's a lot of things, to me, that the show is kind of a trial run of for George, in my opinion, but it's good. The good thing that I would take out of this video and this post is that George was pretty positive about the book writing process and his progress as well, and writing as a whole. But that's the one thing I would take that was pretty positive out of this. But thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I kind of rambled on there for a little bit, but yeah, if I was gonna make this video, I wanted to give you guys my full reaction to it and do it kind of justice. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.